Welcome in, everyone. You're listening to Bulls Central. Coming back to you with more guests on the channel. I know you guys have been wanting to see more guest appearances, so I've got a brand new one today. You know him as the lead writer for Bleacher Nation Bulls, co-host of the Points in the podcast. It is my pleasure to welcome to the show Elias Schuster of Bleacher Nation. Elias, thanks for taking the time, man. It's great to have you on.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much for having me. You have a great channel. I'm always open to talk Bulls, so this is an exciting time. Even though the team might not be the most exciting, I'm
Hey,
always excited to talk about it.
there's always stuff to talk about with this Bulls team. I approach it that way, right? It's like there's always something going on that you can still talk about, even when the team's not doing that well. Be sure to check out Elias, all his great work that he's putting out, Bleacher Nation. Very informative, very knowledgeable content out there. If you like and follow the Chicago Bulls. Also check out his podcast. I'll leave a link to all that in the description. Elias, if you want to give out your socials as well to make sure people follow you there too.
Yeah, if you want to follow on social, you can always find my work at Bleacher Nation at BN_Bulls on Twitter or X, whatever you call it now. Just like the Sears Tower, always calling it the Sears Tower, not going to change the name. So, and then if you Facebook, same thing. You can just Bleacher Nation Bulls. That's where we'll be posting all the content. And then me personally, on Twitter, I basically just use both accounts to talk about the Bulls at all times. So that's at Schuster_Elias. And other than that, yeah, but bleachernation.com is where you can always find my writing, find the different articles. We always try to make sure we cover everything from a city edition jersey coming out to, a more in-depth look at some of the lineups that the Bulls have. So we're trying to just be the obsessive fan for you so you don't have to be, because it can be hard sometimes with this team.
Absolutely. Thoughts on the City Edition jerseys? That was just unveiled, and they're going to be wearing it for tomorrow's game. Is that correct?
Yeah, Brooklyn, the first game that they'll be sporting them will be against Brooklyn, the first in-season tournament game. I wouldn't be surprised if they also wear them again. I don't quote me on this. I don't know for sure, but I wouldn't be shocked if they wear them for other in-season tournament games too. But yeah, I was underwhelmed. But what I wrote too was like, at the end of the day, I'm not like mad about it because
Yeah.
it's ridiculous they have to release one every year as is. I think
Hmm.
because and I've been okay with the last two. The two times ago with the Chicago script was my favorite. I'm a sucker for the Chicago script,
I love
so
that
that was
one.
my favorite.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's okay. I like the sentiment, the idea of channeling the old Chicago Stadium, but the execution I thought could have been a little better.
I thought it looked better once we saw it on the players. When they initially did that reveal or it was leaked. I don't know how they get photos of this when they're leaked. I was like, what is this? This is like a
The
practice
leaked
jersey
photos
from
are
middle school. It's like, what is this? But they look
Yeah, the
better on the
leaked photos
players.
are always horrible because
Yeah,
they're in the worst lighting. It's like a
exactly.
warehouse lighting. It's whatever. So you have to wait. Like the Art Deco ones that came out a few years ago. Um, those actually grew on me a little bit when I saw them on the players and I saw them under the stadium lights, the arena
Right.
lights. But
Right.
yeah, those leaked photos they never do them. They never do them justice.
So let's talk about this team. Quite a team we've got here. A team that is hard to figure out sometimes, right? A team that's frustrating to watch. Sometimes they're exciting to watch. We'll talk about last night's game against the Mavs because I actually think that was one of the Bulls' better games. I know we were talking about that a little bit offline before we started, even despite the loss. But wanted to start by getting your initial impressions of this team 5 games in. What are some of the big things that have stood out to you thus far, both good and bad?
Well, I think, it's hard, right? Because it is a copy and paste version of last year's team in a lot of ways. You have the main changes of Torrey Craig and Javon Carter, who I think, to both their credit, have played really well. Carter specifically in these last two games. Torrey Craig, though, all season long has given them what they've been missing in a lot of areas. So to start at least with some of the goods, with some of the positives, and because we mentioned a guy like Torrey Craig, I think what he's been able to bring them from an offensive rebounding standpoint, that changing that mindset has definitely been a noticeable improvement. And
Mhm.
that was something they talked about all off season long. We need to crash the glass harder. We need to create more second chance point opportunities. And while they didn't necessarily do a great job of scoring off those offensive rebounds against Dallas, like we saw last night, they still got 11 offensive rebounds. And they're one of now the better offensive rebounding teams in the NBA. And so Craig is a big part of that, but so is Ayo mentality has changed. Nikola Vucevic, I think his mentality has changed because
He's
he's
he's become
crashing
a
the
better
glass.
offensive rebounder this year
Yeah,
so far,
I think
anyway.
he
Yeah.
had five last night. I think he had five in the game before that. So and then, just because of the way this team's shot profile has changed a little bit, they're doing a little bit more closer to the rim. That's going to naturally lend itself to getting more of those opportunities. But the Bulls have taken advantage of those in some of these games we've seen so far. So
Right.
I do want to give them credit for that, because they've mentioned a couple of areas they've hoped to improve. That was one of them, and that we've seen genuine improvement in. Other than that, however, not a lot of other big upgrades so far. The shooting profile remains a problem with the 3-point shot.
Yeah.
A lot of people kind of talked about after the Indiana game, like, oh, see, they don't need to shoot threes. They won. It's like, that's not true at all, because shooting threes, even if you're not good at it, it's a numbers game in the NBA, right? So you need to make sure you're keeping up in that department, but also just in general, what shooting threes does for you is space the floor out, keeps the defense a little more honest, creates that room to drive to the rim. So I don't think they've checked that box in the way that they've wanted to, even though they
Yeah.
did shoot 33 last night. You're not, the type of shots they're creating haven't necessarily been perfect. But yeah, I mean, there's a lot of stuff to ramble on, and we can get into more. But I just think overall, it's been a similar version to the team we saw last year with a little bit of different makeup on.
It's funny you were talking about the Pacers game. I think it was Will Gottlieb who mentioned this stat. Um, it was something like the Bulls took more mid-range shots than shots at the rim and corner threes combined in that game. This was the game they also only took 17 threes, which was lower than any number of threes they took all of last season, and yet they still won the game. I like, you kind of going back to what you were saying, there's this sentiment of, well, the Bulls don't really need to take threes then, because they won and they weren't just hoisting up a bunch of threes. And then the Mavs game took 33 and they lost. I don't agree with that
Well, what I want
sentiment
to
at
point
all.
out too with
Yeah.
that, and not to interrupt, but like what I want to point out, because I was looking into that too in that Pacers game, the seven when they shot the 17 threes, I think a lot of fans will jump to the idea of, well, it's because they're dominant in the mid range. DeRozan's good in the mid range. Vooch, he can be solid in a pick and pop scenario. Lavine's okay, but they only shot, I think it was 33% in the mid
Yeah.
range.
They didn't
I
shoot that
wrote it.
well. No.
It was not, yeah, they didn't
No.
shoot well there. So it wasn't like they were dominating in that category. And I think sometimes that can be the misconception. So it's and even if they don't shoot it well from three, there's just good things that come from making a team have to play defense in that way.
The other misconception too is that, I mean, the Bulls were fortunate that the Pacers missed quite a few of their threes too in that game, right? And it's like, and it was obviously an extremely close game. It's like, had they just hit a couple of those, and some of those were wide open looks, they just missed them. That changes everything, right? And then the whole narrative, the whole discussion changes as a result of it. One of the things I did want to bring up, because I feel like at times we as Bulls fans in seasons like these, we can get pretty negative, almost to the point where we go looking for negative things to point out in a game or in the season. You might question the overall direction of the franchise, but let's talk about some of the positive things. I know you talked about that a little bit, that we've seen thus far, but what are some of the good things we've seen early on that maybe we didn't see last season, aside from what you already mentioned as far as the additions of Torrey Craig, Javon Carter? Because I think one of the aspects that I have liked that I don't think is being talked about as much is that maybe it didn't happen as in a few of the games, is overall they're trying to change their approach on offense. I know it doesn't seem like it, right? Because it's like in that Pacers game, it wasn't there, but they are trying to play faster. It's just they're not executing upon that. But anyway, I'd just love to hear your thoughts in terms of like, what are some of maybe the positive things that we are seeing?
No, I would agree with you. I think that they are trying offensively. They slip, and it's not going to be perfect, right? That's also the thing. Like, we do have to remember we're 5 games into this. While my
Right.
expectation for the season is still pretty low, I would still, I still think this is a team that hovers around 500 if they keep it all together. But at the same time, that we're still 5 games in. So there's going to be games like the Pacer game where they slip back into old ways, and still maybe they pull it off. But I would say overall, for the majority of these 5 games, we have seen them try to approach the offensive side of the ball different. And yes, that includes shooting a little bit more, a few more 3-point shots. It's definitely a greater priority. They've passed up more than I would have liked, but it was an effort in OKC. They shot 42. They shot 33 last night. Like, they averaged under 30 last year. They need to be above 30 and hover around league average, which is around 34. So, they're doing their best to create some of those looks, and a lot of that, to go along with what I think is a positive change to the offense, is they want to create a lot of them through drives and kicks and
Mhm.
living in the paint. I think they've done a pretty decent job of trying to play downhill, trying to get downhill. We saw it at the end of Indiana, even though there was some ISO ball there. I think we have to remember that, because I think anytime fans see ISO ball now, they want to just kind of go, no, 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 like that's not what it's supposed to be. But at the end of games, when things slow down,
Yeah,
you're going to need some of that. And
for sure.
the Bulls do have both DeMar DeRozan and Zach Lavine, who are very efficient isolation players. So while that shouldn't be your offense the whole game, I think letting them do that in the end of the game is still important. But not only just get a shot, whatever shot you can, put your head down and get to the rim. So when the Bulls went on that little run against Indiana, I think it was a 9-3 run to kind of solidify the game over that last minute and 40 seconds or so. It was 3 straight buckets in the paint. You had a Caruso
Right.
dunk in transition. You had DeMar. It was like a pick and roll at the top of the key that DeMar just takes to the basket. Zach Lavine, same thing. He gets downhill. Vooch, after they find him, with a Halliburton kind of situation where he had Halliburton on him, he goes
Mhm.
right at Halliburton and gets inside. So there's definitely a mentality there of we have to get to the rim. And
Yeah.
you want to see more free throws generated from it. That needs to improve. But that philosophy that they have, I think that's where their identity is starting to show up. And I think we saw it against Dallas too. Like they know that this team has the athleticism, the explosiveness, and a talented big man like Vooch to just try to score at the rim and then create what you can from there.
The other thing I'll say, and this is probably me just being a little bit too on the optimistic side, but I mean, the Bulls have not been shooting the ball well. You'd have to
No,
think that eventually some of those shots are going to fall,
the law of averages will come into play.
right? I mean,
It'll even out.
especially, Patrick Williams is an example, right? And we can talk about him too. I mean, obviously, he's been a disappointment in the first 5 games. And I said it last night, I was tweeting about it. I was just like, I kind of just feel bad for him because he's getting decent looks and some of them just aren't going down. Like some of them are in and out. And that's got to be a huge shot to his confidence. He knows this is a big year for him. This is a prove it year. And it just continuing to miss shots is just not good. So, and I think, overall, especially with how efficient the Bulls have usually been in the mid range, and they're not that efficient, like you were saying, you would have to think that eventually they're going to regress to the mean, hopefully.
DeMar
So
especially, because DeMar has shot 30 or 40. He's shot 43% on the year so far. He
yeah,
has shot above 50% the last 2 years. He's not
exactly
going to
right.
shoot 43 all season.
Yeah, hopefully anyway.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the game last night. So the Bulls, they lose to the Mavs in a close one. Like I said, I thought they did an incredible job in locking up Luka Doncic. Also helped that Kyrie Irving didn't play in the game. But despite that, they really guarded Luka well. The Mavs still got whatever they wanted, though, was the problem from three. They went 20 for 40 from deep. Both Grant Williams and Tim Hardaway Jr., they just lit them up from behind the arc. But to me, it's not even just the 3-point shooting. You also have to look at the number of free throws that the Mavs got, right? They got to the foul line 28 times compared to the Bulls 11. I feel like we've been saying this since the start of last season. We already started talking about this just at the beginning. Statistically speaking, you're not going to win a lot of games when you're seeing these kinds of results. We've said it over and over. There's a math problem here, right? How do you think they go about fixing it?
Yeah, I mean it's tough because that was the whole thing this offseason. It was, we hire Peter Patton to come in and take over player development because he's a shooting coach and he's going to change our shot profile. And the word shot profile were used over and over again. We're going to shoot more threes. We're going to do this. And I think you can't really change your shot profile until you change your personnel. And at the end of the day, your top 3 players, Lavine can be a higher volume 3-point shooter. I think he
Yeah,
should be. He's only shot averaged about 7 a game the past couple of years, shooting about 40%. I think he needs to get up to about like 9 a game. There's
yeah,
players that you go and look who are shooting that amount per game, who he's more efficient. He's proven to be more efficient than. So he can help a little bit more in that category, but it's just so tough when you're 3 players. One of them is a mid-range maestro in DeMar, and then you have another guy like Vooch, who yes, he can stretch the floor. Like we all know, he can shoot threes, but I think he can help. I think they can get him more. I think there's ways for them to create a little bit more 3-point looks for him, but at the same time, like that's not his game, right? Like his
yeah,
preferred game is living in the post. So it's hard when your top 3 players like that. That's not a primary thing for them. And I would say Lavine, even more than just creating the threes, like he is a guy that just that likes to live around the rim and use his athleticism to
right.
drive. So it's just not their preferred thing. And then your role players, Well, you've improved with Torrey Craig, Javon Carter, these guys that definitely can shoot it, and we've seen a little bit of help from that. You're also relying on Alex Caruso, who's been pretty inconsistent throughout his career from deep. While Patrick Williams has been good to start his career, it's been on low volume. So
Yeah.
there's scenarios here where it's just it's a personnel problem in a lot of ways, and also you just lack that primary point guard who I think at the end of the day, like helps influence that, helps look for those type of things, helps
Hmm.
look for those type of shots. And as good as I think Coby White has been at times, like we can't pretend that he is a true facilitator, true point guard. He's not.
Right.
So while I'm fine with him being in the role right now, I respect everything that he's done. It's just they are, he's a score. He's always been a score first guy. So he
Right.
doesn't necessarily help create that stuff. So for me, it just always comes down to like the way this team is built is always going to lend itself to the fact that they're just not going to be shooting a ton of 3-pointers, but they still need to be around the league average at least. You need to force yourself to.
So kind of going back to that, we're specifically talking about Coby White. I mean, one of the things has stood out to me that's become a little more painfully obvious. I actually said this after the second game of the season, even though I realized that's way too early on and it's a bit of an overreaction. But the Bulls need to change their starting lineup, in my view. Initially, I was saying that Pat needs to come off the bench, have Torrey Craig start. Even now, I would go as far as to say that Javon Carter should probably be starting over Coby White. I don't see how the coaching staff could look at this roster and just keep putting these guys out in the starting lineup when it clearly isn't working. But I also know that Billy Donovan probably is seeing this too, and it's like still too early. We need to give these guys some time. I guess what do you think, and how long or before we actually see a starting lineup change, if at all?
I thought we'd see it before the Pacer game, to be completely honest.
Yeah.
In our database at Bleacher Nation, I had the article written ready
Oh,
to
no
get
way.
posted. Yeah, sometimes you got to be prepared, right? So I
Yeah, yeah.
have it's sitting there in thing for me to publish. Just have
There
to
you
go and
go.
change some stats, change some opinions because it'll happen a couple days later. But to be on top of stuff, sometimes you gotta prepare in advance. So I have it sitting there waiting for me to edit and change because I thought it would happen before the Pacer game. It didn't. What we've seen the past, I thought then it would happen before this Dallas game. It didn't. So I really think I'm just going to keep saying I think it'll happen the next game until Patrick Williams gives me a reason to not to believe that because
Right.
he has played. I don't want to make it, and I'm writing about him today on the site. I don't want to make it like a bash Patrick Williams fest because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, I don't think the stats truly represent the player he is. The year he's had to start has been very, very poor, and he also deserves criticism for that. But you can't, yeah, to speak to your point, like I don't know how they can continue to look at this and go, yeah, it's fine for him to stay in that starting lineup because Torrey Craig has done so much good that it just makes one more sense for him to be there. But not only could having Craig next to the starters just give you a bigger spark to start the game and give you more consistency, but a big thing for me is I think that having Williams in the second unit just helps him, just should be able to
Hmm.
help give him more confidence
Yeah.
because he just clearly doesn't have the comfort and confidence next to the starters to hunt his own shot, to play what he wants to do offensively. So to me, you have to just put him on the bench, let him play with the second unit. They need a more, primary scoring option anyway, that second unit.
Hmm.
They've been staggering Zach or DeMar, and it's been one of them. And then we've gotten a little more from Javon Carter recently. But I think Pat would just feel more comfortable in that scenario. And also, it could just be a wake up call as well. Like it really does show you, hey, this is now the next step we have to take. Like you're moving here because you're just not getting the job done. And you'd have to hope in a contract year that finally lights a spark in his head. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think it's hurting. It's not only hurting Pat at this point because he seems just mentally struggling out there to
Yeah.
to really adapt, but it's also obviously hurting the first unit to keep him out there.
And what do you think about Coby White as well, as
Oh,
far
for
as like
Coby,
keeping him in the starting lineup? Or
yeah, I'm willing to give him a little more time. I think he's had good moments throughout the first 5 games, and he obviously had a great preseason as well. I think we've seen a decent comfort level with him when it comes to understanding where some of these guys need the ball in their spots.
mm,
And I also just like the fact that he isn't afraid to drive to the rim, right? Like that's something for me with Javon Carter. Like Javon might be he's going to be a solid ball mover. He can get out and transition with you. But because I was originally on the start Javon Carter train, and then Coby
Mhm.
kind of won me over with his preseason
Same,
performance. And I
same.
think so I think what I like about Coby still is they do want somebody to get downhill and, like we talk about, live in the paint. Coby just does that easier than Javon does. He
Mhm.
has a little more of that quick first step. Obviously, he's super fast, and I think he's done a decent job also recognizing, like, okay, the offense isn't doing what it's supposed to right now, so I'm just going to force the issue and try to, attack. We've seen that. I think we saw that last night against Dallas. There was a little bit of a slump, and two straight drives, Coby, or two straight possessions, Coby goes to the rim. So
Mhm.
he does have this. He's starting to understand, like, I know what this offense or this coaching staff wants, and I'm going to just try to play that way. And that's what at the end of the day, when you don't have a true obvious point guard, that's the kind of guy you want to put in that position, is who's going to play the game the way the coaching staff wants it to be played. And I think Coby still does that. I think he understands, like, this is the offense we're trying to run. I'm going to do my best to bring that out. So I'm willing to give him a little more time, but his highs and lows have always been a problem. And if he can't give you something consistent, then it's going to have to be time to at least try something else potentially.
It's the exact same thing I mentioned in my post game video yesterday. I mean, the biggest thing with Coby, really, ever since he came into the league, consistency, right? He'll have these super hot streaks where you're like, all right, I think this is it. I think this, Coby's starting to break out. And then, it's just like, oh, what happened? He went 1 for 8 tonight. What's going on? So that's been my biggest challenge with Coby, is just the level of inconsistency. I will say, like you, I was won over by Coby in the preseason for how well he played, and then was like, "Yep, makes sense that he's in the starting lineup." I'm a bit surprised because Billy Donovan does love his veterans. With Javon Carter, a little bit more experience, and obviously the outside shooting helps as well. Even though Coby can obviously shoot threes, but for me, I just don't know how much longer it's gonna be. I feel like Billy Donovan can be a bit stubborn sometimes in these types of scenarios where he's just like, nope, this is the decision I made, and I'm gonna stick to it until it gets really bad, and then it's almost too late. Um,
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me, but I think I do think Coby is still in the, in the green. Like, he's still been a plus player to begin the year.
mm,
So, I'm not saying that should dictate everything, because sometimes the plus minus stats aren't perfect by any means. But I think it just comes down to me, the inconsistency. So I think
yeah,
if he can at least find a groove that what you're getting each night, then I think he'll stay there. But if it continues to be, one game, because the first 2 games, I believe he shot like 15 times while he was inefficient, he was still scoring, I think, a combined like 20 or maybe 32 points between his first 2 games or something like
hmm
that. Like, and then he had about 12 assists. So he was definitely very involved. And then we saw like an 0 for 4 shooting night, and then we saw like a 1 for whatever, and just shooting under 10 attempts a game and things like that. So, and then I think he's been working defensively. I want to give him some credit there,
yeah,
because his defense will never be perfect. He and some of it is honestly just like the type of athlete he is, because
yeah.
he
Well,
does not have a
size,
big
yeah,
wingspan. Yeah,
yeah,
he's a bigger guard technically. He's 6'5",
right,
but
right,
his wingspan, I think, is shorter.
yeah,
And so he's just never going to be like a super lengthy defender. But I think the effort has been there since
yeah,
last season. And like on Luka, he would put his body on. He's
yeah,
learning, like, if I can't defend you well, because you're just more skilled than me, you're more athletic in some ways. Like, I'm just going to put my chest on you. I'm going to put my body on you. I'm going to make you feel me. And I think
right.
he's learning that as well. So there's a lot of positives, I still think, with Coby. But yeah, as I keep saying, it just comes down to, if he can't find a way to where what you're going to get each night almost, then you almost have to try something new with the way that this team is trending.
So what is it that you need to see in order for you to really feel confident in this team that they're making strides in the right direction, and not, maybe not even just for this season, but for the future as well?
Oh, It's it's a hard one, because at like every question with the Bulls right now, it's just tough. It's hard.
Right.
I think for me, I feel like I know what this team is,
Yeah.
and I think we all do. Like, I don't think fans are stupid. I think that they all understand that year 3, when you don't change the roster that much after what we've seen the first 2 years, like, it's it's hard to expect things to drastically change. And I
Mhm.
think, um, for things to get better, that you have to have the big 3 be better. Like, those 3 together need to make more sense, and the fit needs to be more obvious. You can't have nights where, Lavine's scoring 51 and DeMar and Vooch can't find a groove. You can't have nights where also just in games last night against Dallas is a perfect example. Lavine's got it going. He's cooking for that first quarter or for that
Hmm.
first half, and DeMar just can't find any sort of rhythm.
Right.
So it comes down. Their success will always depend on how those three are. And we can talk about how Patrick Williams is going to be can be an X factor, or Coby White developing the right direction can
Right.
be an X factor. An X factor is when you already have something good in place, and then that takes it up a level, right?
Right.
Like the Bulls' big three isn't something that's already good in place. It's something
Right.
that has been completely inconsistent. The fit has not at all come to fruition in the way that this organization has thought. So for me, it's just until you make some sort of drastic roster change or shake up that big three, I feel like it's going to be really hard to see this team take any sort of leap in either a short-term direction as an even better team that has higher hopes, or a long-term direction even as a team that makes more sense building for the future.
So the age-old question: do you think the Bulls should blow it up?
I think that
Putting you on the
if you ask
spot.
me, yeah, if you ask me right now, it's hard for me to say
Yeah.
no. I think I think yes would be my answer now
Right.
because they are 2-3, and like I said, you're in year 3. If you're hovering around 500 for another year, it's just not good enough. And
Right.
especially when this front office, it tells you that what they think this group is capable of, and when you have 3 all-stars and what that means and what it's supposed to mean. And DeMar, the bigger thing too is off the court stuff. Not with not the way this team interacts. I don't want to make it sound like that. I just mean contract logistics, things like that. Like DeMar's
Mhm.
up for a payday. You
Right.
cannot justify paying him. You can't be a good organization and justify paying him when the results are what they are. I think DeRozan deserves all the money in the world for the way he's played the past 2 years.
Yeah.
That is not a problem for me. I think that someone should pay him a ton of money because
Mm.
he came to Chicago, proved everybody wrong, and I love the way that he's
Yeah.
played. But you can't justify Chicago being that team if
Right.
these are the results that you continue to get with the nucleus that you have.
Right.
So, if they can't manage to find a way to like really look like a playoff team, a top 6 seed here before the deadline, it's hard for me not to justify some sort of move. And I don't. Maybe that doesn't have to be buy Lavine, buy DeRozan, buy Caruso, even like full sell off. Let's just get a bunch of assets.
Hmm.
I'd be willing to see them go buy DeRozan. We're gonna try. Let's see what we get for DeMar if it's a good return. Maybe move one other piece or something, and
Hmm.
and shuffle the deck around. Lavine and Vooch, because Vooch is obviously under contract. Lavine's under contract. See if you can reinvent it a little bit, because you also never know what assets come on the market later in the year that they can try to get. But it does sure seem like the most reasonable thing right now is to go in a very different direction.
The bigger question though is will they? So will in other words, let's say by the deadline, I don't know, they're hovering on 500. Maybe they're 2-3 games below 500. By most accounts, that's not good. That's not cutting it. Will the front office actually do anything about it, or do you think they're just going to continue to double down and say, nope, we believe in these guys. We think this is the best group to win, kind of like what they said last trade deadline. Do you think they'll actually do anything? Like, will this year be different than last year's trade deadline? I guess.
The only reason I would say yes is because of the DeRozan payday. And
Mm,
then because that's also, and my reasoning for yes may not even be a very optimistic, happy one, because you would have to pay him a lot of money. Then you have Zach and DeMar and Vooch locked into this big payday, likely over the luxury tax to build these
right.
teams like moving forward. And ownership's going to be like, no, no, no.
Yeah.
So honestly, the reasoning might just be they don't want to, like, they're not a luxury tax team. They're normally not. So it actually
Sure.
might be a bad reasoning. But that could be the reason why. But yeah, I think the criticism is going to be too big. I think we did, at least to the front office's credit, which is hard to do right now. Like, they did at least blow it up at that first deadline. Completely. They recognized change was needed. Um, to also, to their credit, they've said that this season is going to be like we need to see what we have. Like,
Right. A feel it
I
out year. Yeah.
yeah, and I think they understood too, like, their reasoning for not going to the luxury tax again or whatever, at least makes some sense in the fact that they're like, well, you saw the type of team we were last year. Like, we can't do that until we know this group's going to be better.
Right.
Um and so yeah, I think it's more likely than not, or more likely than it would have been last year, for instance, because it's just so much harder for them to sit in front of people and say, yeah, we're going to keep them together. We're going to keep giving paychecks and that kind of stuff. So I would lean toward yes, but let's just say if they do keep it all together, there will be zero surprise from this side of the table.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern that I have, and this isn't really necessarily to the trade deadline, but also just going into the offseason, is I feel like if the Bulls, and I've been asking this a lot of people, is it's like how is the front office, how are they going to measure success? I asked about it in media day, right? And they said, oh, we want to make the playoffs. That was our goal. If they make the playoffs, but it's very underwhelming, they make it 7-8 seed, whatever. Maybe they win a game or two in the first round, and then there's an exit. I think my biggest concern at that point is like everyone else will be clear. All right, this group is done. They're gonna, revamp, figure out what to do, try to offload some assets and try to start over. But I feel like the front office is basically just going to say, well, Lonzo Ball is going to be coming back. We think that this
also
group,
we made the playoffs 2 times in 3 years. Like that's
exactly
not bad, right?
We made the playoffs last year. We're making strides in the right direction. I know you were at Bulls Fest too. When they were interviewing Mark Eversley on the Bulls Talk podcast live in front of everybody, he was saying he didn't say it like, oh, well, the Miami Heat, right? We lost them in the play and they eventually went on to the finals. He wasn't saying in the sense of we could have maybe gone to the finals had we beaten the Heat. Yeah. But when what he did say after that was, we feel that we are almost there. Now, I don't know what almost there means by him saying that, but in my view, that's my biggest worry is that they get to the playoffs, they barely squeak in. To them, that justifies keeping this group together for one more year, especially knowing, hopefully, that Lonzo is going to be coming back. Do you think that would be the case too?
I mean, 100% of fear I have. I'll give you that. Like, I also agree that it's something that I worry about constantly with this front office and with just this ownership group. I think because the whole thing that a lot of people like to talk about, which is hard to deny, would be that the ownership just likes being right there, just in the hunt. So then you keep fans interested, keep fans coming into the building, keep fans invested. But you don't need to actually go hard and pushing this team all the way to the top and making them a true contender. So it's always a concern for me. And I agree, like some of the rhetoric has been underwhelming as well. Like the idea of, we just got to get back to the playoffs. Like if that's really your ceiling, like, because if you're an 8 seed and you lose again to the Bucks in 5, maybe 4, whatever, like you can't it's still not a reason to justify bringing everything back. I look at this team very similarly to the way that which is funny enough because Vucevic is on it. The Orlando Vucevic teams,
right?
Like when they were always in the mix. I think they only made one playoff series. It's possible that's where the Bulls end up, but they were always a team every single year that not only did they believe internally, like this year, I think we can make a jump, but they would actually get a little more credit, I think, around the league too, of like this team sneaky this year. They might be able to take a jump up, but it was the same type of mentality of, just keeping a group together for 3 to 4 years. They only really had one playoff series. They won one playoff game, I believe. Yeah. And it was always at the, they were always just looming as at a mid team, but they were a small market. So that's just more okay than doing it here.
Right.
So that's how I view this team right now. And I definitely fear that they'll keep it that way if they squeak into another playoffs. And the only way I would ever be okay with them committing to this core for another season, I think my bar is like you have to win a playoff series. Then you can go, okay, we're going to try to run this back. And then hopefully they even would go over the luxury tax and add some different pieces, but that's the only way. Even if it's a competitive first round series, I just don't see a scenario with the DeRozan contract situation and that kind of stuff where you can and the Patrick Williams contract situation, like where you can just commit to running it back again.
So I'll get you out of here on this. Predictions. Where do you see the Bulls finishing this season? And if the playoffs, how far?
I see the Bulls as if they don't, let's assume they don't blow it up because that obviously changes. Or unless, I'll give you 2, I guess. Because if they don't blow it up, then my assumption is that they will be a play-in team. I think like you said, I think the shooting is just going to be a little bit better. Like they do have good offensive players individually. I think they'll become a more efficient team as the season goes on, scoring wise. I don't think the offense, while it will look potentially stagnant and stale at times, like they just have good individual scorers. So I think that they will hover around they would hover around the 500 mark still. and probably be maybe, it'd probably be a play-in team again. And then maybe they squeak in, but it's just, you never know with the play-in tournament. So that would be my projection for not blowing it up. And then obviously if you blow it up, you just do everything you can just to get a better draft position. They have their pick this year, which is a big thing. This draft doesn't look great at the top of the line.
Right.
But 2025, you got to think about that too for blowing it up, because Cooper Flag looks like he's
Cooper
going to be a boss.
Flag, yeah.
So,
And their pick is top 10 protected, if I'm not mistaken, right? Yeah, for the DeMar DeRozan trade, yeah.
Right, and then that's their only other future pick that's out there. So they do at least have some picks coming up here. But yeah, not blow it up, play in tournament, and then blow it up. Obviously, then you're just going for lottery stuff. But I would still give their blow it up chances right now. 5 games in at a 50-50 because of who this front office is.
Okay. 50-50. All right. Well, Elias, I cannot thank you enough, man, for taking the time out of your day to meet with myself, fellow Bulls fans. We really do appreciate it. Keep up all the great work. We'll be following along, and best of luck to the season.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.